Tracking is all about analyzing movement within the frame and then follow that movement to attach masks and effects to do compositing or to build motion graphics. Today I want to have a detailed look at the Fusion Point Tracker, show you exactly when and how to use it and how to access the tracking data in different ways. This will be an intermediate level tutorial. I will start with a straightforward example, but then I show you what you can do when the tracking path is sometimes occluded or other complications, and I show you more advanced ideas how to access the tracking path. For example, you can use position and angle independently, or you can even calculate the distance between two tracking points. So as always, if you're entirely new to Fusion, I recommend my free Fusion beginner course, or if you want systematic training for DaVinci Resolve and Fusion, check out my courses on my website. For this one here, you can download the footage for free. Follow the link in the description to get the footage if you want to work along with me, and then let's start tracking. I have this wonderful drone shot here in front of me, and the first thing I want to do is I want to position something on the road, and something in this case is an arrow, which I have drawn here with a polygon ahead of time, attached it to a white background. So I want to bring this in. You can of course import an SVG vector graphic, draw something yourself, use a text plus node to put text on the road, whatever you like. And let's merge that in with a simple merge node, and I go into the arrow itself and position it where I want it. I want it like here, and scale it down quite a bit, like this. Here, and you see the problem is it's sliding off because the camera is moving and also scaling, right? It's coming closer, so that won't work. You could use a planar track to identify the plane in which the arrow is working, and I have a tutorial on planar tracking. However, here it wouldn't be the easiest way because there are all the cars moving through the plane, which could potentially disturb it. Also, there isn't much contrast on the road. So a planar track might not be the best solution. Better would be to find a good point which you can follow. So here in this case, we have some good contrast points here on these edges here, for example. And those we can follow with a point tracker. Let me bring it in. You find it in the effects library in the tools section under tracking. You find the tracker here. And let me bring this into the flow and close the effects library. The tracker gives you by default a tracking node here, tracker 1, and here a tracking pattern which we can position. So you might notice that the tracker itself is called tracker 1, and then we have a tracker list called tracker 1. I will put multiple tracking nodes in this tutorial, so to keep things a bit organized, I will directly rename it. I will call this one road tracker. I just say TRA for tracker, road tracker. And well, here I'm fine with tracker 1. I don't have a name for this point. You see if it's in the view, so if the viewer is after the tracker or on the tracker, let's put it on the tracker, then you see like the pattern here, and I am going, like you could try here, that's not much contrast. Here you have good contrast with the green. I'm also looking for something where I can visually easily see if the tracking point is well positioned or if it's sliding around. So I would probably go for something like this, because like this corner between the road and the greenery, so it's kind of easy to see. So I'm always looking for sharp edges as much as possible, intersecting lines. That's really good, like cross-shaped stuff or corners, tight corners. That's really good. Straight lines, curves, and so on, not so good, because the point could slide along that and the pattern would look the same. So this is good. I can resize it, maybe make it a bit smaller so that the cars don't interfere. Let me go, doesn't really matter here. Usually you start tracking from wherever the pattern is best visible, but here there's really not much difference. So I just start from the beginning, choose a good pattern like this, And then I have here a search radius, which just determines from one frame to the next in which radius is the pattern being searched. And I will make this rather small, because from one frame to the next, if I go with the bracket keys, I can move between the frames. You see there's hardly movement. It's very slow movement, so there's no need to have a big search radius. And it's not so much about computational time requirement, it's more about the tracking pattern not getting confused, for example, by these cars that move through accidental misalignment and so on. So that's more the point. Here you see also a preview of that pattern, and you see the contrast that it identifies. Sometimes certain channels can be dominant, so you have perhaps really good contrast in the green or in the red channel. So you can check here where you see really good contrast. Otherwise, luminance is the default, or you can do a full color track where it uses all three channels. In this case, there's probably not much difference. I am on the frame where I positioned it, in this case frame 0, and let's just track from here to the end and see if this works. And if the tracker itself is in the viewer, let me bring it into viewer 1, which I have open, then you also see the preview while tracking. You see the tracking path here, and you can check if it's at the end still on the same place. There's now the pattern which moved along, but you can at any point later put that away or put it somewhere else. The small cross here, that is the actual point that was determined along that green line. So if you go from one frame to the next, you can check if that green cross here is really stable, and you see it is till the beginning. So that worked perfectly fine. So I can use this right away to put my arrow onto the road. Let's try this by going into the Operations tab. In the Operations tab, you can choose Match Move, which means, well, match the movement to the analyzed scene. And it has different options here. Foreground over background means analyze the background and move the foreground so that it matches the movement of the background, which is exactly what we want. So I will put the arrow now from the merge into this one here. And this does a merge. It also has settings very similar to the merge. And where is my arrow? Here it is. Let's move it into place. And you see this is now relatively stable. It would be perfect if the arrow was like here on top of my contrast point. The further away it is, the more potential errors I have introduced. For example, if I bring it like over here, that wouldn't work at all because of the scaling, and I am just attaching it to one point, and the distance here is fixed now, but the scale of the image doesn't work. If you want to do that, you need the scaling factor as well, and possibly rotation if the image is rotating. So for that we need 2 points. So 1 point gives me the position, 2 points can know the distance between the 2 points and the angle. So with 2 points I get rotation and scale. So I bring in a second point to get that. Let's go back into the tracker here. And here I can just add a second point. And I will position the second point. Let's again go to the beginning and position it down here. And actually we have some like really sharp contrast here, which I think is, this is like a really tight edge here. This one is like a bit blurry. It might also work. Even here, the inside edge maybe with the black might work. So you can try. Only problem here might be if there are cars like driving too close. So let's make the pattern smaller. However, even if there are cars driving through, if they're not, there is a bit of tolerance. The tracking pattern is not being updated. The tracking pattern, the way it's on frame 0, is being used like throughout the whole track. So if there's some temporary disturbance, it might still be able to follow along to the next track. Again, very small radius, and let's give it a try. And now I don't want to retrack tracker 1, especially since I repositioned the pattern just before to show you the cross underneath. So if I now click track, I would overwrite this and with something useless. So I will temporarily disable tracker 1 and yeah, focus only tracker 2 and click track forward. And let's see if this works, or if the cars, you see the cars go, they kind of pass by but doesn't seem to impact the tracking, and all in all it again looked quite stable. Perhaps it's sliding off a tiny little bit. I think, yeah, at the end you see it was sliding off a tiny little bit. Anyhow, let's see if we actually see the problem, if we notice it at the end. So now if I enable tracker 1 again, and where is my error? I put it here. Let's see. Well, even here, even though that's good, some distance away from the tracking points, and there could be some perspective problems, still it seems to almost work. Nonetheless, I didn't even want it to work over there. I want it to work here. But even here, 2 points are helpful because the second point gives me the scaling as well. So the arrow scales down as the, or scales up as the camera moves closer. And here now it should, yeah, it looks, I think it looks good. I think my tracking was successful. There are, of course, the cars driving through. I would need to mask them out. I could build actually masks and even track masks, you know, for every car. That would be a lot of effort. Sometimes if it's just for 1, 2, 3 frames, sometimes it's actually faster to quickly paint it out. So let me show you this. I don't want to do much compositing here, but just as a quick example, let me bring in a mask paint node from the Shift Spacebar menu. Mask paint is the name. And let me show you how that looks like. I bring the mask paint on the left viewer, attach it, and bring the road on the right viewer. So the mask paint is just black here. Black means transparent. And once I start painting here, let me select the tool. Once you start painting, you see the paint stroke in white, and this is then the area which becomes opaque. So that's exactly the opposite of what I need. So I undo this, go into the mask section, invert it, and now I have it white by default and kind of paint with black. And if I paint here over the error, I'm painting out the error. Let me undo this because I only want to do this in a few places, specifically where, for example, this motorcycle is driving over. The paint stroke is way too broad, so I go into the brush controls here and bring down the size. And if you want, you can also, with the keyboard, like go in and then with the arrow keys, like go up and down and find the correct size here. And if you have a drawing tablet, it's even faster to use, like a stylus, tends to be easier. So I can do this to paint out the motorcycle. But here I actually don't see it very well. Let me undo this again. So instead I will bring the media 1 here on the left viewer and zoom in here. So I can also paint here and see the result on the other side. Even a bit smaller, like this, and then I go through. Okay, and perhaps not the absolute best result, and you can always go back and use the eraser to fix something, but within like half a minute I get a result which, at least from a distance, is already working. Feel free to do it with all the cars if you like, or use masks, whatever you are more comfortable with, but this, like with a bit of practice, you can do this in a few minutes. One last comment on the compositing. So if you want this arrow to really look like it's painted on the road, then you could make it, for example, with the level here, you can make it transparent. Let me double click somewhere, you know, reduce the opacity a bit. You can also do that inside this node here. You can change the merge, for example, from normal to try out the different compositing modes. Maybe like a soft light or so, which lets some more from the background through, so it changes the mathematics of how background and foreground is being composited. But you know, maybe just stick to normal and then reduce the blend here, or the level of the mask. Both has pretty much the same impact, and if you want, add some noise or some form of distortion to make it a bit more realistic, and then you can get a pretty realistic looking paint on the road. Rather than doing more compositing, I want to track the next object, in this case a car, and there I have a few additional problems. So the car is rotating, which means the tracking pattern is actually changing, and the car is also leaving the frame, so we have a little bit of complication. But then I also want to use that tracking data in different areas of the frame and show you how that works. So both at the same time, first of all, let me use only one viewer here, and let me bring in the tracker node from the Shift spacebar menu, tracker, and I will rename this car tracker. And where's the default tracking point? Here it is. Let's put it on this yellow car. I want to follow this car. The car will go like around, and then here it will leave the frame. And it's close to other cars here, so I will need to make the pattern small. Also, the question is, do you want to include the ground or not? Generally, you don't want to include background because it has its own movement. Here, there isn't much contrast on the ground, so there are no markings, or so it's like almost like a uniform color. That might actually work, but it's probably safer to try and make the tracking pattern small and just, take like these really high contrast windshields here. Even though there's a bit of reflection, I don't mind having a bit of the road, but I hope that something like this has a better chance of working. Now the car is rotating, so I need to account for this. That's why I am kind of sticking to a rectangular pattern and then use this adaptive mode over here. And I choose every frame, which means that the tracking pattern will be updated on every single frame. So it calculates the movement to the next frame, then updates the pattern and uses that new pattern to track for the next. There's also the best match, where you have like a tolerance slider, which can help if you have things like noise and disturbances, and you only want to update once the tolerance is exceeded. More difficult to use, but every frame is usually enough. Again, I check how far the car is moving in a frame. Well, not much, so I can make the search radius really, really small. Maybe it's driving a bit faster here, so I'll give it a bit tolerance here. Okay, and I did this on frame 0. Let me bring the tracker tool in. Then I also see here the contrast and can check the different channels where I potentially have most contrast, or again, not that much difference. So maybe just use the full color track, and from frame 0 track forward and hope for the best. That does seem to work. Okay, good. That worked pretty well. Of course, it doesn't work once the car is leaving the frame here at the end. Now, when you have that, you can try to fix the path, or you can extrapolate. So fixing the path, if I zoom in, let me move the center here away. I can go in and see like the last point where it's working fine. Here it's working fine, and then it's working off. So I can go to the point here and manually drag it. And I could do this like even off screen, right? Could try to manually estimate where this point is supposed to be and try to fix it that way. However, that would be quite difficult with all the points here and difficult to do it consistently. So better is to extrapolate numerically. So I can go to the last point where the movement makes sense, then go to the spline editor where I have a displacement path. Displacement, if you're not aware, is just the progress alongside this path that I see in the viewer. So in the viewer, I can manipulate 2D coordinates from the path. Here I just have the progress across for each frame, how far along this path am I, and that's why I have these log symbols which indicate that this is a displacement where I can only manipulate that progress but not the point itself. Nonetheless, I can delete the points from here, so I can mark all these keyframes here and just box select and then press delete key, and then they're gone and I'm stuck on the last point with no progress. But I can right click gradient extrapolation, which continues the movement between the last 2 points and continues this movement even beyond the frame. So any effect that's attached can now also leave the frame, which is great. Let me close the spline editor again, and now I actually want to use this. I could again go into match move here, do foreground over background, put some effect and, well, put it on top of the image. Or I can use it in other areas of the compositing flow by connecting to that point, connecting to that path. Since I mentioned this path is automatically being created as a modifier, which you find here in the modifiers tab. So here you see car tracker 1 path. So it kind of adopts the name. So car tracker is the name of the tracker, and then it attaches a bit behind. You can, by the way, rename this if you want. We can rename this yellow car path just to recognize it more easily. So this is a modifier which sends back for every frame sends back information about the position along this path and also heading and other stuff, and you can start using this. For example, I have a merge node here from before. Let's bring in a circle, and I will just attach it to a background like this and bring this into the viewer. This is a black circle. Let's make it a white circle and make it not solid, but give it a border width instead and make it a small one. And now I want to position this with the center position onto the car, basically, right? Like this, which is this center position. But instead of doing that manually, I right click and connect to, and now I use the yellow car path position, and well, there was the car. This was a different one. Sorry, I'm at the end. So now I'm on the right car, and I am following that position until I'm going out of the frame. So that's a great thing to attach effects. I could have done that as well with the other way that I showed you before, but this is in a way more flexible because I can also now use the same mask for example, to mask off other effects. Let's say I want to, instead of making this circle around, let's say I want to make it darker. I can just attach a brightness and contrast. Let's remove this, attach this, make it solid this time. And now I have the brightness and contrast where I can make the car darker, or probably I want the opposite. So let's invert the mask in the settings tab, apply mask inverted. So now I have this type of effect which I have masked off, and I have just inside my mask attached something to the center position. You can also use the path in different ways. You can use the heading of the path for an angle. You can also paint the path itself. If you have done some of my other tutorials, you might know how that works. It's also in my Fusion VFX course where I deal more with these path modifiers and explain this maybe a bit slower than here in this overview. Nonetheless, let me very quickly do it just so that you get an idea. Let me attach a paint node here. And in the paint node, I just draw a polygon stroke like this. And this stroke, if I want this stroke to follow the path, I can go into the modifier. So the stroke is also a modifier. And in the stroke controls, you can here right click for shape animation. You can add something and connect something, but there's nothing available. And what I need is I need the path here that I have tracked. It's in the modifier, this yellow car path, and in there you have the right click for shape animation, and you can publish here. Now again, I'm explaining this in other places. This is maybe a bit too far for this tutorial. Nonetheless, in the yellow car path, publish it, which is publishing the polygon, like this line here, publishing this line. And once it's published, it's available in other places. For example, in the other modifier of the paint stroke, right click here and connect to polyline value. I did a separate tutorial on paint strokes where I have shown this, and again it's also in my courses, so that's why I don't want to go further. But this is one way how you can have a line following that car, and of course make this line then make this line smaller, and you can also use the right on, right off to then animate it in a way that the car is following the line and the line is being built up and stuff like that. Now I have discussed this in other places, so I don't really want to go into depth here. Instead, I want to put an arrow into the scene and have an arrow which follows my car. There I have two problems at the same time. On the one hand, I have the movement of the car. I want the arrow to point to the car. On the other hand, I have the camera movement. And if the arrow is supposed to have like a fixed origin in the scene, then I need to account for the camera movement. So I really want to do both, and that's getting a little bit tricky. So basically, the way to think about this is get rid of the camera movement, place the arrow, and then apply the camera movement again. Let me show you how I can do this. The camera movement, let me go to the beginning and make some plays. I kind of have from this road tracker, right? So this gave me the scale and the movement of the background of the road, independent of the cars. So let me reuse this. I will copy it and put it here outside of the flow for now, so that I can look at it independently. And let me show you something in the match movement here. So I have match movement foreground over background. If I set this to background only, it is matching, well, the movement of the background, kind of undoing the movement of the background. And if I only bring this into the view and in the settings tab, bring the blend value up, I set the blend value down here for the other example. That's why it was like transparent overlay. So I bring the blend value to 1, and now you see that I get these boundaries, and the reason is that I am undoing the movement of the background, which is stabilization, and undoing of a moving closer is in this case zoom, so the scale changes, and that's why I get the boundaries, but I get otherwise a stable background. And you can verify that if you go with the mouse somewhere and just play back, you see that these points here are pretty stable. Again, it will work best like in this area. It might not work as well some like over here or so, but I want to place the arrow like here in the center, and I hope it's good enough for that purpose. Before I place an arrow, let me just mark a center point so that we can really see that. I will do that as follows. I will just use a red background like this and attach again an ellipse mask, using lots of masks today here. Make it a solid, but make it small. Here's the ellipse, make it like really small, and merge this over. Actually, let me make it a bit larger to see where the center is of this roundabout. So this is the center, right, of this circle, and make it small to mark it. And this should now be pretty stable in, well, as far as my tracking data gives me, but it looks pretty good, so it should be pretty stable here in this center. Now I want to attach an arrow, and since I already have the arrow here, I will copy my prepared arrow and attach it to the ellipse, which will just merge the two masks together. So I just get a more sophisticated mask, which consists of a dot and an arrow on top of each other. So let me select the arrow and scale it down via the polygon points. So I select all the points of the arrow like this, and then click into the center or into one point to which I want to scale, hit S on the keyboard, and then move the mouse. So selecting the point, S for scale, and then drag, and you can drag the polygon points. This way the arrow is, well, it is scaled down. You can also Alt click to move it around in the position. You can position it like this. And the center point I will, well, put exactly on the center of the ellipse. So I put the center point up here so that I can rotate the arrow exactly around the red dot that I just painted. Right, so the rotation of the arrow happens around the center point. By the way, quick trick, if you have two tools which have the same type of parameter, in this case center, the ellipse also has a center, you can copy the tool, Ctrl+C to copy the ellipse with all the parameters, copy the whole tool, and then in this tool, in the arrow, I can right click on the center parameter and paste setting, and it uses the same parameter from the other tool that I have in the clipboard. So it copies the parameter selectively onto the one with the same name. So it can copy the center from the ellipse onto the arrow without changing the arrow otherwise. So that's pretty cool. And now this Z coordinate is, I can use this one, well, to rotate the arrow. Now I want to make this arrow rotate so that it follows the car. However, what tracking data can I use here? I have tracked the yellow car, but I tracked it on the original footage, not on the stabilized version. The arrow is now on the stabilized version, so that the arrow sticks to the background, the center of the arrow sticks, the scale of the arrow moves with the background, so that's great. But now the tracking information is wrong because the tracking on the original plate is not accounting for that. It would be possible to transform this, but this would probably require some mathematical expressions and be a bit tricky. So here I will just use a simplified solution, and I will just track again, but track on top of the stabilized image. That solution may not be ideal in every scenario. So in this case, I will actually put another tracker here after the road tracker and call this car stabilized tracker, something like this, and really track on top of the stabilized image. This has, of course, the risk that if this track isn't good, then errors can propagate, right? Also, if I want to change anything here later, that would be a problem because then I'm causing issues here. So just to avoid this, maybe I want to lock this to not accidentally do that. So there are some downsides, but I find it easier than to use this track and transform it as per this stabilization. So you would have to transform the track itself, and Fusion doesn't directly have a standard way of doing that. It's possible, but it's a bit tricky. So in this case, I just need to roughly get the position of the car, which isn't too difficult to track. So let me get the car, and hey, since we're tracking again, let me use a different car. Let me use the red car here. This red car, I want to use this because it's partially hidden. So it's kind of an interesting example in a few places. It's like half hidden under the trees and so on, also leaving the frame at the end. But that's fine. Let me start somewhere where I can see it well and place the marker here, the tracking pattern, position the tracking pattern. I will position it a bit more to the lower end, I guess, because the trees are coming from the top. I will again enable the adaptive mode on every frame. This time, since there's the trees coming and so on, let me try to get some more contrast together with the road. Yeah, let's see if that works. Tracking search radius, again, rather small since the car isn't moving that fast from one frame to the next. That's fine. And here I will probably stick to the default, or again use the full color track. We'll see if it works. And let's give it a shot. And this time I press this button because I'm tracking from this frame. There we go. And hey, that worked even with the tree. That's great. So it went through the tree. That's good. At the end, of course, it is not working here when it's leaving the frame. So let me take again the last point where we have it. You see the pattern may have been sliding slightly on the roof of the car. That's fine. I don't need it that super accurate for my purposes. But here, last frame, where it's useful, go into the spline editor, delete the points afterwards, right-click for gradient extrapolation, and now you see that it's moving out, which is great. Let me go back to this frame where I started the tracking, and from this frame I'm also going in reverse, and let's see how far we get here. And there we are losing it. So let's see where we are losing it. It is, again, it's sliding as the car is turning. The pattern is rotating, right? So it's also during the update sliding a bit. No problem, it's okay, I guess. But then where we have a problem is here. We are completely losing the track. So let me go to the last point where we have the track. Yeah, here we have it on front. And then what you can do from the last usable frame, you can append a tracking pattern if you find a new tracking position which works. So I think since the car from the back is hiding under the trees, this front edge is actually available for a bit longer. So what I can do is I set it here to track center append, this setting, make the pattern like really, really small, and just focus on the front edge here. And maybe use the red channel. It really has good contrast here. And now I'll try to just follow that edge and see if I can follow this, but I don't want the tracking path to jump, but I want this to be like computed as an offset to the current position. So from the current position, continue from this position, but use the movement, the relative movement from this position. And that is what is happening if you have track center append active and then go only backwards from the current frame. Go backwards and see, oops, I get a few more frames. So you see the path did continue longer, and it really continued until here when even the front edge is vanishing. So then of course everything is lost, but until here I'm really getting till here roughly. And then the last frames, once again, I can go into the spline editor, and these are useless, so I delete them, and the gradient extrapolation is already turned on from the other end. It happens on both sides at the same time, and you see that the linear movement continues under the trees. All right, so now I am tracking the car here. So let's use this information now. This is now here. I have here in the modifier the car stabilized tracker path 1. Let me rename it red car stabilized path like this. So I want to know that it's a path and that it's the red car that I tracked and that it's on the stable image, so that I know what I'm doing, where I'm doing it. And I will now go into the arrow and I want to modify the rotation. And I can get the rotation from another modifier. Let me do a right click, modify with, and I want to use a modifier called offset angle. And this modifier, if you go into it, can take a position and an offset and then calculate the angle between the two, between the position and the offset. Now I need to put one of them as the center position, like around which I want to rotate, which is this ellipse center position here. And the other one I put on the moving object, on the motion path. Which one you use for which doesn't really matter. Let me just connect the offset, connect this to the path. So I want the red car stable path. And the center position, let me bring the merge again into the view. So here you see this was the center position, the red dot, right? Or you can select the ellipse tool. When the ellipse tool is selected, you see the point of the ellipse. I can again copy and paste. Yeah, actually, let's do that one more time. Control C, copy the ellipse, go back to the straight arrow, modifiers, offset, and here, but here it's called position, it's not called center. So here you can't really paste because the parameter has a different name. So if I paste, nothing happens. It's called position, not center, so it doesn't know which parameter to paste when you do the paste, right? So in this case, you could manually paste the values, like go between the tools and put the numerical values in there. But you know what? I see the ellipse center here, and I have this center here, which is this one here. I'll just manually position it over it, and that will be good enough. Here, manually positioned. The other one is the offset. So the arrow is now rotating, driven by this modifier. It's just kind of off, so the car is here, the arrow is pointing there, but you can use the angle coordinate to give this an offset. You have here angle offset, and I guess we need like minus 90 degrees, I guess, in this case. Okay, and well, it's pointing like a bit more to the back of the car, so yeah, depending on the tracking point, if the tracking point was shifting or anything, may not be ideal. So we can use the offset to fix it. And if necessary, I could even animate this. So if I need to, like some manual correction, you know, do it here and then check at the end. Well, at the end, I think it's working pretty well. Maybe, you know, as the car is moving, I can do a minimal correction, but generally it's working. It's just if the tracking point wasn't perfect, then we can, yeah, compensate for that. How do I bring this thing together? I'm still on the stabilized image, but I want to be actually on this image here. I want to be on the full unstable image, so to speak, with the camera movement, and I can do it the same way I did that here in the tracking node, right? So technically we could even use this one, right? We already have a tracking node which attaches something to the background. We have used this tracker here to track. Doesn't mean we have to use this to actually merge here. We can use the merge and put it over here. And now you see that I have brought the same graphic over here, but I have positioned it based on the data from here, right? And now bring it in over here, which has the operation background over foreground, which is the type of mesh movement which attaches based on the camera movement and everything. So this center point here is perfectly stable on the final image if I attach it here. The arrow is rotating around the center between the beginning and the end. It's scaling appropriately to, you know, always have the same distance to the circle here. So all that is working just by bringing it in here, and this I just kept for the analysis purposes. Okay, so this works. You see it's now again semi-transparent because here I made this one here semi-transparent in the blend mode, but you know what, I'll just set it to 1, and if I still want this arrow to be semi-transparent, I can also do it via the level up here of the mask, just make the mask lower. Or I can copy it and, you know, do multiple, but here I can kind of put everything together in one tracker, which is kind of convenient, so I'll keep it this way. Now I also want to calculate the distance between two cars and make an animation where an arrow is like sitting between two cars. Now this I can either do on the stabilized or on the original footage, depending on whether I want that graphic to scale with the camera movement or not. Just the thing is I need two cars in both cases, right? Whether I do it on the stabilized version or on the other version. Let me do it on the stabilized where I have the red car, and then the yellow car I will just quickly track again. You know now how it goes, so you can do it on your own. I will quickly do it and come back with a yellow car track. So I have done that on my own, added a yellow car tracker, a second tracking point into my tracker on the stabilized image. So I have a tracking point pointing on the yellow car and on the red car, and both on the same type of movement without the camera movement. And now I want to position an element in the middle, like an arrow in the middle, which points from one car to the other. And I have already created a fancy element here called arrow ruler, which I have created ahead of time, which looks like this. This is a macro which I created based on shape tools. If you like, look inside. I can give it to you as part of the exercise download if you want. I just made something slightly fancy, which has here a distance, like this, a distance slider, and then a text, and well, you can make this. This is basically duplication of rectangles based on the distance. So far so good. And then a text which I can change. Let's bring this in. I will merge it in. Actually, let me put it here. Bring it into the graphic overall. So here we can see how it looks like at the end. And let me make it, well, let's first position it so that it makes sense between those two cars, how we think it should go. It should go like here, and it should rotate with the angle like this, and it should scale down. Let's I have this bar width here, which I can make smaller, and then I have the distance. So I have these two sliders to work with. Yeah. And then I want to position it like this, and the text can also be scaled down and can be repositioned to be closer here to match. So that's the rough setup here that I have in mind. Now this distance can be used like a scale, and the angle, like any angle around the center, and the center I need to just place in the correct place. If you don't want to go as fancy as I do here, you could just take any image, any error, and just use a transform and transform it to a new center position, an angle, and a scale factor. That's basically the same. I just wanted it a little bit more fancy. Now all the parameters that I have been setting manually, I need to connect to tracking data now, and I can use the same modifier tool that I used before when I calculated the angle of this error. So there I used the modifier to have a fixed center position here and a moving tracking position here, connect them and get an angle from it. That's this offset modifier. I can use the same modifier to calculate a position between two positions, like an average position, and then the angle around that position for rotation around that position. That's what I will get now. So on the center here, I'm right-clicking, modify with, and use again the offset position this time, offset position modifier. It's the modifier that I have seen and used before with, again, one position here, which I can position, for example, here on the red car. And then there's an offset, where is it here? Which I can position on the yellow car, and then I can set the mode to average like this, and you see it gives an average position between those two. Let me connect them to trackers. So the position here I can connect to either the red or the yellow car. The order doesn't really matter. Let me use the red car stable path position. And then the path opens by default. I can double click on the other modifier to go back to the modifier, offset, connect to yellow stable path position. And this way I have the offset connected to 2. So now I should always be in the center between those two. And I am, but I'm missing the rotation, of course. So let's go back to the tools section, and the same modifier provides back the position, but it also provides back an angle. I just need to connect it. So on right click, angle, connect to, I can find the modifier. In this case it's the offset modifier. Offset on arrow ruler is the default name, and then choose angle or distance, so it shows the single valued parameters, angle in this case, and you see I'm connecting it with the angle. Depending on which point you place where offset position, it's possible that it's like upside down, in which case you would have to go into the modifier and in the angle and distance. If that happens, you have to apply an angle offset here. So if you need to turn it around like 180 degrees, you could do that here. In my case, it worked out fine. So the last parameter, distance, I go back to tools, right click on the distance, connect to, and once again the same modifier, and choose distance this time. And the distance in my case works out perfectly because this tool here, the arrow ruler tool here, is designed in a way that the distance parameter, when it's set to 1, covers the whole width of the frame. So I set up this tool correctly so that the distance is really matching frame dimensions, and thereby matching here the tracker dimensions. And that's why it's really going from one tracking point to the other. If that's not the case, if you just put a random graphic in there, some error or so, then of course the distance might need to be scaled, and you can do that again in the section down here. You have a scale for the distance, so if you need to overall scale it up or down, you can do it here, or you can provide an offset. And in my case, I will provide a constant offset so that I'm not going like from one center of the car to the other center, but more that it's like fixed in between. So I will reduce a constant offset from the distance. Yeah, maybe something like this. And you see, well, because the tracking points are not perfectly in the center, there might be some minor gap or so, but I'm fine with that. I'm ignoring that. I think that really works well enough. And now, as the last part, a little bonus for those people who are interested in expressions and have a little bit of an idea of how to work with expressions in Fusion. I'm not doing like a complete introduction in this tutorial, that would be too much. Nonetheless, you see here there's this distance 2 meters. That's actually coming from in here. There's a text node inside this group. So let me go in there and go to this text node. There's a distance here, and within the text plus node I can add an expression here to numerically calculate the distance. Works like this: right click, expression, and the expression says that I am providing a text, and the text gets a parameter which is a string, and the string here says distance 2 meters. You know what, let's remove the word distance so it's not so long here. Let's just say 2 meters like this. And when you click outside, it's updating. Now I don't want it to say 2 meters, but I want to give a specific distance. And this specific distance I can get from the, let me do the following. Let me look how it looks like on the arrow ruler. On the arrow ruler, their arrow ruler is a parameter called distance. And the technical name is arrowRuler.distance. This parameter I want to use, and I want to display it. So instead of a string, you can, for example, write arrowRuler.distance, and now it's using that parameter and gives you like a numerical value. This is a bit, well, yeah, not very friendly. But you can round it off, and there is no immediate rounding function here, but there is a function called floor, which basically chops off digits after the decimal point. So after the decimal points, just chops them off, takes the an integer under the current floating point number, technically speaking. That's what this floor does, which is now just 0. But if I first multiply this, so if I undo this for a second, if I have here something like 2 to 0.022, and I want this to be, let's say, 2.28 or so, then I can just multiply this first with 100, multiply, and then this way I get the 2 point something, and then use the floor function. So this way I get 2. If I want the decimal points as well, I would multiply this even further, like 228, and then divide after the floor function, divide by 10. So this way, or by 100. This way I get now 2 meters 28. And is this 2 meters? No, this is probably more than 2 meters. Car is maybe 5 meters long or so. So maybe this is like twice that much. So let me multiply this. So now we have like 4 meters 57, and you see the display now changes as we go through the frame by frame, it updates. I also want the meter symbol, the unit afterwards, and in the text node you can provide parameters like this and computations and stuff like that and output this as text, but you can also combine different text or different outputs, and to combine you do 2 dots, which is concatenation, string concatenation in Lua. So Lua is the underlying script language, and if you know a bit about that, then you find out how to do this kind of stuff. Again, most of you might not do this, so you can just copy it from me or look at how I'm doing it. So you combine this value with a string, which is just the meter symbol, and both of this gets entered into this text function, and this gives now this output. All right, let's bring it a bit closer to the ruler, and that's my little motion graphic animation here on top, connecting the 2 cars. Okay, the last bit was maybe a bit more technical and more for those of you who are interested in working with expressions and stuff like this. I just thought it's a nice conclusion to show how I actually compute a distance between 2 points and use it in a graphic. And I hope overall you got a good idea of how I can combine trackers, how I can use that motion path connected to objects and so on. That was the main purpose of this long tutorial, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Cheers.